dismissed. Farooq Abdullah lost the majority according to governor in his letter. I was sitting in his office when it happened. And Rajiv was secretary of the party at that time. But he must, because he must, 1984 June, when the Blue Star took place?
Blue Star was 1984.
84, nah. This dismissed,
In
government was also
June.
dismissed. It
In
was
June.
dismissed. It was dismissed a month later, I think.
The sacking of Farooq's government was a month later,
A month later, yes.
July
So
1984.
yeah. So you have not dealt in detail about that because the chasm between Gandhi Parivar and Gandhi Farooq Abdullah Parivar suddenly was dismissed, and his brother-in-law was sworn in immediately in the same evening, and he lost within 1 month. So don't you think both this is Gandhi and Rajiv? I hope you are also consulted in the process there. Have you not dealt with that in this book?
No, I have dealt
detail?
with it in considerable detail. I've dealt with it in considerable detail. It comes under in a separate chapter. You have not probably seen it so far. It comes under a separate chapter. In 1984, in June, when Operation Blue Star took place, the whole of the Northwest became highly destabilized. Farooq went and held an operation conclave in Srinagar. Now, Mahmoodur Rahman was his principal secretary. I was joint secretary of the Prime Minister. I was not joint secretary, I was director in the Prime Minister's office. And I warned Mahmood, please tell him not to hold this conclave. Because Mrs. Gandhi is extremely sensitive on this point. And because the whole of that area has become very unstable, she will be very put off if you go ahead with that conclave. He then consulted with Farooq and then called me back and said, yes, this is only a meeting of opposition people. And Farooq will not say anything about Mrs. Gandhi at all. He will just talk about the unity of the opposition. So, I had my doubts about that, knowing Farooq that I do, but I kept quiet about it. It was not that Mrs. Gandhi was asking me to please tell them not to do it. I just gathered that from her conversations with me. Although she didn't tell me that, that may have been what she told her party people. But then he held that conclave. And in that conclave, I think he was carried away. He was extremely critical of Mrs. Gandhi. And that was followed. It was then she gave the signal to her governor, and Mr. Jagmohan is there. He will attest to this. It is then that she said that, no, I want him out. Up to that time, she'd gone on saying, although she'd replaced the governor and all, she'd gone on saying, no, we can't tamper. I don't know what will be the result of any fiddling with the elected government there. And in fact, there had been considerable achievement. In 1983, the elections were held in which she lost was a completely open and fair election, which Farooq had won hands down. Now, all these things having happened, the University 87 took the clock back and made the people feel that, well, this mirage of freedom which we were thinking was coming with the return of Sheikh Abdullah and things was only a mirage. Correct. And therefore, we are not going to get this unless there is this revolt. So, and of course, this was served up and assaulted by our friendly neighborhood, and so on. But this is how this process developed. And so far as Rajiv, let me go further with this.
Okay.
So far as Rajiv is concerned, as soon as now, even before, and I've written about this in the book, Farooq and I had to it. Even before when Rajiv was General Secretary, he was working on Mrs. Gandhi. We must now set things right, because by then the other issues were generally, stabilized. So then he was very keen that there should be an understanding with Farooq. And Mrs. Gandhi then reopened. She had a talk with Farooq. I've mentioned, after this, on her visit after Operation Blue Star, she visited Ladakh. And Farooq came to see her in Ladakh. And I've given in detail the meeting that Farooq had with her in Ladakh.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know, but Farooq himself just told me the meeting. She went up the wall, he said. And she started saying, you did this, and of course, as has been said, that she talked about the arse, brazen arse, and all that. And she went for him. He didn't get a word. He wasn't able to say a word. And he came out totally disgruntled. And then, of course, the sacking came after that. and she wasn't prepared to meet him. I had said that no, but he's chief minister, madam, and after all, you're visiting the state and so on. So she did see him, and then afterwards she told him, I only saw him because you told me to. And then that was the case. But by the 31st of October, they had already reopened their discussion, and Farooq was waiting in Kashmir House. He had an appointment with Mrs. Gandhi on 31st of October. He was waiting to see her. When he got news, he was going to see her after that interview by Peter Ustinov. And he got the news that she had been assassinated there. Then when Rajiv came in, and I've described that in detail, what motivated him, he felt that we can't carry on the government of J&K like this. And therefore, he reached out to Farooq, and Farooq reached out to him. And that, of course, I've discussed in considerable detail as to what were the shortcomings. And that, accord, that Rajiv Farooq accord, had a great deal to do with the political element of that accord was all negotiated by Rajesh Pilot.
Yes.
The economic concept of the economic content of that report was arrived at after considerable research, much of which was done by me. Earlier accords, none of them had this huge economic package also to go with the accord. This was one accord which did have. Unfortunately, it did not deliver.
I'm discussing something else. You are given quite detailed information because it must be in the part where accord and discord you are discussing must be in that part chapter, which I have not read in detail. But when I was there in Srinagar at that point in time, when GM Shah was sworn in, I was there and I witnessed to various things happen. But you are given a new perspective to the whole thing. The decision was taken first by Mrs. Gandhi to dismiss, then was created a minority government. Basically, decision was taken to dismiss what you are telling. Yes. And therefore, this whole style of converting a majority government into minority, which is happening now even, that model was first implemented in Srinagar by Mrs. Gandhi. Therefore, Kashmir Accord, how Kashmir discord, it became a discord between Abdullah. So this is an interesting revelation that how Congress party or the current party, they first take up their mind to appoint somebody or dismiss somebody, then create a legislative arithmetic. Is it?
Oh, well, I don't know if you can come to that conclusion. As I said, and I mentioned that in the book also, what made Kashmir special was the fact that it had a government where this conclave had taken place. It was building up an opposition to the center, and the center had this fear because of Operation Blue Star that the Northwest was unstable, and she could not afford to have a hostile government in power and then I've written this in the book also. After Operation Blue Star, she was told, and I've told you who I think told her that also, that Rajiv immediately went and started reaching out to the Sikhs. And reaching out to the Sikhs, according to what Farooq says, she was told that he reached out to Sikhs to instigate Sikhs against her. And he'd gone to the Gurudwara Chatti Patshahi in Hazratbal to meet the Sikhs and calm them down. Tell them, no, don't worry, we will do whatever is necessary, this has to be done and so on. This was reported to her, which is why she took the decision, no, he must go, and which is why she had these apprehensions. And actually, he was trying to do something else. He'd then gone and met Vindranwale. You remember that he'd gone and met Vindranwale at the Golden Temple. Some people there were conjecture at that time that perhaps he'd been sent by Mrs. Gandhi to meet him. There was also conjecture that no, he met him to show his defiance to Mrs. Gandhi. All these stories went on. In fact, it was quite simple. She had not been properly informed, and she was therefore very angry with him, which is what led to this. So I would not say that it became the start of a practice, because there would not be situations of that nature easily presented in other states. This was primarily a security concern, so as far as she was concerned, and Mrs. Gandhi was very, very conscious of security, even more than her son.
Farooq was considered to be a security threat at that point in time.
Not that he was considered to be a security threat, but the manner of his behavior could be construed to be compromising, could compromise security. Not that he himself, I don't think she ever had that apprehension. But he himself is going to come out without doing something.
Wajahat, You must have seen Jagmohan's report also recommending whatever he recommended.
I didn't see Jagmohan's report,
But I
but
saw that report in which
you
he
did
never
it.
said about security aspirations at all. He just
No,
made it, he's lost the confidence, he can't provide a stable government.
that's it.
And because of that law and situation, the usual,
Naturally, that's
which
so.
was,
So a governor's report.
which came from the prime minister office. I was sitting there when he came.
No, that's right. A governor's report is not one which will go into the intricacies of the political background, because that is when she gave that is not when she decided that now let's dismiss him. That is when she gave license. Governor Jagmohan had from the beginning been pleading that let him go ahead and he will dismiss Farooq's government and replace it with governor's rule. Now she never agreed to that in any case. When Farooq's government was overthrown, it was not replaced, as you remember, with governor's rule.
Yeah, it
It
was
was
governor's rule
replaced,
because I
yes,
can give you more bit and
because
because
she no, because for the reason,
Narasimha Rao was the home minister at that point in
yeah,
time, isn't it?
that's right.
So I
That's
spoke to him later when he became the prime minister. He gave entirely different story, which I can't talk here now. I'll talk when I write my book.
yes, do that.
So
But in this case, since I was working with her on this issue of Kashmir, uh, the uh, the what the so far as her when she said in front of me that we have to have an elected government in Kashmir. You see, that went with her whole theory. She'd come to the Indira Sheikh Accord in order to try and restore democratic government in Kashmir after so many years of what I told you had been happening in that state. And she did not want to compromise that altogether, again replacing it with central rule. So she said that in Kashmir, we can never predict what is going to happen. And therefore, it is better if the government remains in Kashmiri hands. So, as you remember, Gulshah became the chief
yeah,
minister thereafter.
he survived for 40 days, I think.
And that became known as the curfew Raj, if you remember.
Correct. Other thing which Wajahat, I have not read it. You might have mentioned because I have not read it. You're not. What was your perspective on the fight between Rajiv Gandhi and Gyani Zail Singh? That
And
became a very Gyani Zail Singh was the president at that point in time.
yeah, I have not dwelt in detail on that story.
Why I'm asking this
But
question because when Rajiv Gyani Zail Singh accepted the post of the president, when only Rajiv called him. I was sitting in the Home Minister's office when Rajiv made the final call. Gyani ji, हम आपको राष्ट्रपति बनाना चाहते हैं. Then he told me I broke the story first at that time. There was no social media at that time. There was something happening. So
yeah,
what I'm saying that so much of a relationship they had, good relationship they had. What went wrong? You were in the PMO at that time, and you have not dealt with this in the book in much detail
yeah.
because that
I have
turned the
not.
whole
You
that
are
turned the
right.
whole thing into something. And Rajiv lost the first
No,
Gandhi to lose.
I have mentioned it. I have mentioned the fact that his relationship with Yanni Zelsing
Yeah,
had soured, but I have not, of course, gone into details as to why it had soured. There are various, and you, of course, know about it, so I don't need to need to dwell on that in greater detail. But the impression that I did get was that Yanni Zelsing repeatedly felt Rajiv was treating him uh, with disrespect. He was not giving him the respect that he deserved. Not only that he deserved as the president of India, but as an elder in his party. That the second part.
KK Tiwari episode happened because he abused Piani and he was dismissed and when
So
prime
that's probably because Rajiv did not have a very high regard for Gyani Zelsi.
he changed
So
his
now,
mind after selecting him.
well, he unfortunately that may probably be the case, but I never discussed it with him. So I'm not in a position really to tell you that this was his attitude. But I do remember he tended to be not very respectful to Gyani Zesing, and it was my impression that the Gyani ji presented that. Because he
That's
was an elder
that's a
statesman.
tragedy because when I met Rajiv Gandhi in a plane first time in 1989, I went to Stockholm with him also. You were there, I think, in that trip.
No, I had gone
Yeah,
on the Soviet
no,
on this visit to Russia.
that was the first time I went there with him, and Sharda Prasad was there. Later on, when that was the last interview which he gave. 89 went to Goa. Because when I coming back with Rajiv Gandhi the day when Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated, and there was Mr. K.C. Singh there was Mr. Bindra, there was Mr. Bandari. There are certain things which I cannot disclose, but I can disclose one thing which I've written in my India today, which I told Rajiv also. Gyaniji, when I went to meet him when he was in his cabin, he was almost disappointed. He was just, you can say, so much demoralized. I asked him, who are you going to meet? The Prime Minister. We were at 35,000 feet at that time. We were flying from Thana to Delhi. And he told me without letting, and I said, Rajiv Gandhi. So I don't know. I told Rajiv this. And I wrote in India Today at that time. And that's why the liking for Rajiv Gandhi, he was so committed, or I can say loyal to the Gandhi family. So I expected a person like you to write a book, because Gyani Dayal Singh in my interview said, मेरे को इंदिरा जी झाड़ू लगाने के लिए कहेंगे तो मैं झाड़ू भी लगाऊंगा. So what went wrong? I expected, because people avoid this particular chapter of Gyani Dayal Singh, Rajiv Gandhi. Nobody is willing to talk. Nobody is willing to write.
I would be willing to talk and write had I known anything about it. I never really discussed it with him. And I have therefore in my book discussed relationships with other people, who I knew. I have, of course, discussed his relationship with Arun Nehru. And that I've discussed in considerable detail on the issue of Babri and so on, and his falling from government. His relationship with VP Singh. For example, when VP Singh resigned, he was completely taken aback. He didn't realize why he had resigned. But these are things that there will always be things that I was not aware.
No, VP Singh episode is one thing which you are not dealt in detail in this your book also. That is another missing part. Why, I don't know. Because Gyani Dayal Singh changed the history of Indian politics and the Congress party itself. And these are the chapters which were expected for many people to write. I will be writing, of course, when I think.
If I'd written everything myself, then there would have been nothing there for you to write.
Because VP Singh, when he resigned, I was with him in the plane from Visakhapatnam to Delhi. He was the defense minister. When I came back, and it was the 10th of March or 10th of January, 12th of January, India Today issue was to come out, and he resigned, and we were the first magazine to come out the same day when he resigned. So he told me in advance, I'm not disclosing it, that I'm going to resign. So that is why he resigned. What happened? These are different issues, because I was expecting this book to see that part of the story, that why did he resign. And the last meeting which we tried to hold Rajiv Gandhi and VP Singh together was midnight in the night. I don't know whether you are aware of it or not. There was other journalists with me. We went to Rajiv Gandhi's house, two of us, with VP Singh, and that was the end of the meeting. After that, it was resignation.
Yeah, well, I've discussed in the book also why the reasons ascribed to VP Singh for his resignation are not very valid reasons. That I've discussed in the book.
Yeah, you discussed that. That's what I'm saying. You discussed, because the reasons I know are different than what you have discussed.
Possibly,
yes. It is perception, but
possibly no. But you see, and I have found also that on the basis of the same facts, people may come to different conclusions.
Right.
Correct, you're right. You're absolutely right. Because the only facts which are count, because why was shifted from finance ministry to defense? The facts are facts.
Yeah, that's correct.
No, facts are facts. Who are being investigated, not investigated. They're part of the archives. And when Atalji became the prime minister, I had certain access to certain documents at that time. So facts are facts. So these are the two chapters which are very important in the history of Rajiv Gandhi and Congress party.
But on that case, on that, I have commented that on the case of his transfer from finance to defense in the context of BOFAs, I have discussed that in my book.
Yeah, you discussed that. I read at a little bit. I read it, because that's why I'm keeping quiet on that particular thing. Anyway, Pushpa, you want to ask any question?
The only thing I want to ask Mr. Habibullah is that we still have left the Northeast out of this. And Assam and the Accord and the Citizenship Amendment Act and the registration are topics of interest now. And this was something which was, again, one of the major milestone landmarks in his time, the Assam Accord. And then it didn't seem to quite, go the way it should have gone. And it continues to be a festering sore.
I think I have discussed it in considerable detail. Also, I had the benefit of consultation with Sandra Hazarika on the question of Assam. I've also discussed Mizoram in considerable detail, which was a success story. The Assam Accord was...
Permit me to interrupt at this stage. A success story in times of Rajiv. But if you talk of triumphs and tragedies, the triumph is a certain fleeting moment where you celebrate the triumph, and the tragedy further generations come to live through. So if the Naga Accord is not settled even today,
That's
the
right.
Nitai Naga Hills, the Mizo problems, the extended Nagaland remains a major problem.
It is. And the brew problem in Mizoram. There's, as you know, the brew problem. But coming back to Assam, the the and there I have of course dealt extensively. My reference book, uh, Myron Miner's book had come out just about that time. That he was entering into these accords in the Northeast in the 1970s, in the late 1970s was Miner's book, and it was a very fresh book at that time when I was in the PMO. And I took a great deal of time reading it in order to give the inputs which Rajiv was looking for. I did not have much to do with the with the Assam Accord. It was Mr. Pradhan who was really looking after it and working directly with Rajiv. I had a little more to do with the Mizo Accord because I had been associated with that in the time with Mrs. Gandhi also. And I'd gone with her to Mizoram. And so on. The perspectives of Vaina were brought into all these. Unfortunately, what happened in Assam is that in conceding the uh, the uh, the demands of the major community of Assam, it triggered off, and I think this is a lesson that we should learn. It triggered off a host of other demands, and I've described those in the book, the Bodos and so on and so forth, and each group then wanting its own area, which is what this is what had led to the Assam, as you know, was Assam as the whole of the Northeast earlier. Mizoram and Meghalaya and all. Shillong was the capital of Assam. I know this because my first memories in life when I was 2 years old was when my father was posted as the sub-area commander in Shillong. So, and in fact, I mentioned that also in the book because that was the time that was being negotiated for the border between Bangladesh and Sylhet and so on, and Assam. And the chief minister of that time had taken a stand and handed over a portion of what was originally Assam and Sylhet to Bangladesh, and he was strongly criticized for that. But that is how it will be. The Bengalis then became a minority in Assam. Otherwise, they would have become a majority. But anyway, those are other stories. But this is this led to the Assam Accord, led to the escalation to what can be called escalation of other separatist tendencies which were already rampant in that area. It had resulted in the creation of those separate states in the Northeast. And it all stems from the way that Assam, which had been the Ahom kingdom, had been an independent kingdom for years,
Yeah.
and was ceded to India by Burma, who were not the rulers of Assam at all, ceded to British India, and that was in fact the Kankan, and the rest is a long story, and of course I can't cover it here. And I think you'll find some answers in the book. But as Amartya Sen says, that a good book, which I hope this one is, raises more questions than it answers.
Absolutely right. That's why I'm asking so many questions, because you put it together. History also, there are too much of history is there, which I have not read it here. You try to put the contemporary politics with historical perspective as
That's
well,
right.
which is you have
So
tried to
I
fit it
hope I
there.
hope it raises more questions.
Now, the question which I'm going to raise, one more question which I have think here. Odisha poverty, when he was concerned about poverty and
Yes,
whatnot, and then
yes, yes.
Kala Handi story which we wrote that
Kalahandi and
in
Fulbani, that's
India
right.
Today wrote a cover story on that time,
Yes,
and
yes.
that death, hunger, drugs, and we got a nasty letter from Mani Shankar Iyer, who was at that time because don't you think that Rajiv Gandhi was guided by more by what I call the do school of thought, that you must go aggressively and deny everything. Because you have spoken about Rajiv's men, in which most of them are doom school boys. You have not spoken about politicians at all, except Arun Singh, yourself, and even that Alu Alia who was there in the AICC. And you have spoken about those three doom schools. So what do you think that Rajiv, when we wrote a story and we were convinced our facts were right, He was worried about poverty. There was hunger dress. Even the chief minister who was there at that time, Janakivalla Patnaik, I think, was the chief minister at
Yes,
that time.
Patnaik was.
And I met him, and I showed him the letter also. He said, "You are talking about my prime minister and his best noon school boy," because at that time, Suman Dubey, you, everybody was doing school. He was in the government, Suman, my boss and good boss. He was there who had me also. He was additional secretary in the I&B ministry at that time. So what I'm asking you, Rajiv, the personality was more guided by his schoolmate or peer group rather than the politicians?
Uh, when I was writing this book, and I sent it to various peers, as you say, references to look through the thing. Uh, they pointed out I tended to cite Doskos, and obviously that is not really correct. Uh, was he guided by a kind of I would call a Dosko school of thought? No, he was freer maybe in speaking to Doskos, but he was not guided. I can't say he was guided by us at all. He was a person who was very open to ideas, and I've tried to mention cases there. Like getting hold of a person like Bidon Mishra, who is an activist, a consumer activist.
Right.
And he just heard him speaking somewhere. Even his meeting with Sam Pitroda. Vijay Dhar had met Sam Pitroda, and while he's talking to him, he said, "You're a friend of Rajiv Gandhi's, and I have these ideas." He mentioned that to Rajiv, and Vijay, then Rajiv sent for Sam Pitroda. So he was very open to ideas, and this was how he was advised. People like that. Jairam Ramesh was very much younger. He came in only at the end. Even when he would speak to Rajiv, Rajiv was always open to what he had to say. This chap, this editor of Hard News, Pradeep Kapoor.
Pradeep Kapoor.
He's related a story of how he would go and speak to Rajiv, and Rajiv would listen. That was, in fact, Rajiv's strength, but I fear also may have been a weakness, because he listened to everybody. He listened to all. And I mentioned in that book that it is a characteristic of his, which I also share, being very, very trusting. In his case, it was, in my view, a strength, but you may certainly say that it is a failing, because it is what cost him his life.
Wajahat, I'm asking because I was covering Congress party very closely. All of them were friends. You might say whatever. Even now, I have more friends in the Congress party than I have in the other party. And they would confide in me what was happening with Rajiv Gandhi. Because he was a newcomer in the party, and there were old people whom I knew very well before Rajiv came into politics.
Yes, of course.
उनका सबका कहना ऐसा हिंदी में जो है सब कहते कान का कच्चे थे राजीव गांधी क्योंकि I am saying this because I am a witness to something which he spoke to me in Rashtrapati Bhavan when the first Republic Day thing happened after he had sacked R.K. Dhawan and everybody and got some new people there, which you referred to, Winston George and somebody you referred in that, because I'm not going to Veer Bahadur Singh, because Veer Bahadur Singh used to come to my office after meeting Arun Nehru and Rajiv Gandhi both and tell me what happened. So I'm coming to only that particular instance where he told me about an industrial group. We were talking about them, and he said, "वो तो बहुत ही बदमाश हैं, they control everything in this country, and I will fix them." I'm using the word "I'll fix them." I've written down in my diary time and date.
किसने कहा I'll fix them?
Rajiv Gandhi ने. He was telling me as Prime Minister, and later on, they got the benefit, and everybody else who was opposed to them was fixed. I'm not going into elaborate matter. So, कान का कच्चा का मतलब क्या होता है? Was he कान का कच्चा, or he was, as you saying, he was a listener. He used to listen to everybody. But Congress party at that point in time felt that he was most of the senior people. वो कान के कच्चे थे.
इसीलिए वो समझते थे कि कान के कच्चे. But this charge is even made by some against Mrs. Gandhi कि कान की कच्ची. You may construe it that way. It is true that he gave ear to everybody who wanted to express a view to him. I would not therefore say that it is because he can't accept it. There was one failing which he had, which I think he had got over by the time he had been leader of the opposition for several years, having known him for some time. Because as you saw, his jettisoning to that high position was very brief. He had no real political experience at all. He had not been an active, unlike his brother, he had not been an active participant in politics at all. He had always been there to help his mother. He'd always gone out of his way to help his mother. That means accompanying her, taking her here and there, doing all that, but not really assisting very much in her politics. Now, that being the case, uh, the people who had been working with her would probably have thought कि हर एक की बात सुनता है, जो भी चाहता है जाके उनको बताना शुरू कर देता है.
होता तो वही था ना जो लास्ट आदमी कह के जाता था.
नहीं, ऐसा भी नहीं है ना. That would be कान का कच्चा would be that. कान का कच्चे का मतलब ये नहीं है कि हर एक की बात सुनना. कान के कच्चे का सबका मतलब ये है कि लास्ट आदमी की जो बात है वही. But that was not the case. And that I can vouch for because he often, and that is where
I must admit he was a very charming person.
No. That is where I come in. You see, that is how, and I think the value of my work is that, because he would often discuss them with me, ideas that had come to him, and he would often mention those ideas openly. And I mentioned this in a meeting of the Planning Commission when they were discussing this Indira Gandhi Awas Yojana. He came up with some outrageous suggestions.
Right.
Those were suggestions that he'd received from various people. He placed this before the Planning Commission. Now, Indira Gandhi ke zamane mein, she would listen largely to what people had, the cabinet or the committee or anyone had to say. And then at the end of it, she would give her view. So that view was not a view, it was a decision. It was an order. But she would give it as a view. Don't you think we should do it this way? That meant you do it this way. But in his case, he actually meant argue it, discuss it. So when you say Khan ka kacha, that is true. He was always open to an argument and contradiction and ideas. And he would change his view. And I think that the example I've given to you about Shahbanu is a very good example of that.
Yeah.
He completely changed. Initially, I thought he's going to go by what I have suggested to him, but he then went by the advice of MJ Akbar. Whether that was, he did not. You can't accept somebody come off the street and tell you something. You yahi baat theek hai. It is not the case. MJ Akbar was an established, young, rising editor. And you can imagine, I mentioned in the book also that Rajiv would have thought that, yes, here's a young Muslim who is modern thinking, who is giving me these ideas. Therefore, I would not quite concur with this thing. Wrong decisions is having come to wrong decisions on this basis. And I can also understand by experienced old party people would tell you कि ये तो कान हर एक की बात सुनता फिरता हमारी बात मानता नहीं.
Rajiv Gandhi, one book NK Singh is also written there, which talks about who made the Prime Minister office more powerful. In your book, you say the first time Principal Secretary was appointed by Mrs. Gandhi,
Sorry, I didn't
in
get
1971. But this Mr. NK Singh had written in the book that Prime Minister office became more powerful than the Cabinet Secretary when Principal Secretary was appointed by Mr. Lal Bahadur Shastri in the Prime Minister's office. But you are saying the first time Principal Secretary was appointed when Mrs. Gandhi 71. Which one is correct? And because there was no Principal Secretary in Lal Bahadur Shastri's time.
That's right. The first Principal Secretary appointed to the Prime Minister was Mr. Haksar was the first Principal Secretary.
Correct.
Mr. Haksar was the first Principal Secretary, and this is very clearly, lucidly explained in Jairam Ravesh's book as to why he was appointed Principal Secretary and so on. So that is there. But in Rajiv's time, he thought of, as I mentioned, he thought of doing away with the position of Principal Secretary, but came back to it by the end of his time. P.G. Deshmukh was appointed as Principal Secretary. Sarla Grewal was only appointed as Secretary.
Correct.
And before him, there were parliamentary secretaries. Before her, there were parliamentary secretaries. So that's why I said he thought in terms of restructuring the Prime Minister's office and others, but this remained an aspiration.
Mr. Habibullah, you also suggest that Mr. Deshmukh was the one who actually asked for the withdrawal of security cover on Mr. Gandhi.
This is what I was told
Yeah.
by a colleague of mine, whose name I have not mentioned in the book because he asked that it should not be mentioned, who was there in the cabinet meeting of Mr. VP Singh, where this matter came up, and Mr. VP Singh asked for his opinion because he was a senior bureaucrat, and he gave this opinion that, and I can understand that would have been the answer of a bureaucrat, but I would also have expected that that particular person would have mentioned the fact that Rajiv was under grave security threat of his own.
Yeah. I'd just like to end, if I may. Thank you so much, all of you. I'd just like to end, if I may, with the very personal story that Mr. Habibullah has also mentioned. He's talked about the bulletproof vest that Rajiv actually gifted him. And he ends by saying that, perhaps he should have worn it that day, that fateful day in Sri Perumbudur. It's very moving. Mr. Habibullah, would you like to talk a little about that?
Yes, I got this call. I had been in Srinagar and there had been an attack on me outside the Jami Masjid. I had been fired at, and in fact, the DSP who was with me, Mr. Shaw, lost his life. Another person in the who was shopping at that time, a woman, lost her life. And my life was only saved because I hadn't taken the direct route back to the road to where my car was parked, but went round. Those of you who know Srinagar will know that the Jami Masjid is in a sunken area,
correct.
and you have to go out round it and then climb up the stairs and go up to the main road. So I then ran around it, and the chap ran behind me with a gun, and he was stopped by this chap who went by the name of Mustaqul Islam, who didn't want me. I assume that he didn't want me dead. He wanted to kidnap me because that would have served a better purpose for them. But the younger fellow probably got emotional and thought he'd bumped me off altogether. And so Rajiv heard about this, and 2 days later, I got a call from George saying that a parcel is coming to you from Indian Airlines. Please have it collected. So I said, I'll do that. What is this parcel? So he said, you'll see. So when then 2 days later, a call came from Indian Airlines. Of course, they said, where can we send? I was commissioner. So they weren't going to ask me to come and collect it. They said, where can we send this parcel? What is your address? And when I opened the parcel, it was a bulletproof vest. I've still got that vest. When after he'd passed away, in fact, when I came down to Delhi, I was at that time still in Kashmir, and I came down to Delhi and I went to Teen Murti Bhavan, where his body had been arranged in state, and near him was on side where these people, the family members, were sitting there, and Sonia was sitting there, and of course I passed by, and I hurried down and said namaskar to her, and she said this with her hand. So I went up to her, and she said to me that, Rajiv was very worried about you. Did you receive the bulletproof vest? Now, as you can imagine, I had tried to be cool and calm at that time, but I completely broke. And then that is the tale. I've still got that vest.
Yeah.
I then asked her later on, because I became secretary of the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation, and she set up that museum in the IGMT. I said that, don't you think that vest should be displayed at the IGMT museum? Because they've got a room, special room, in which all things, his clothes and things are displayed. Rajiv's clothes are displayed, which he was wearing on that last day. And she said, no, he wanted you to have it. So you have to keep it. I have it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. There's this and a lot else for people to read and to enjoy, to savor, and also perhaps to feel bad about when you look at where India is.
I like this picture. Very smile.
Yeah. And he was really India's first 21st century man. And, I wonder what India would have been like under him.
Well,
thank you so much.
That is what I have said in my book, that he has to be judged by how far he was able to bring India into the 21st century.
Yeah.
But that was his election prompt.
Thank you so much, all three of you. It was such a pleasure to listen to all of you. Thank you, Pushpesh. Thank you, Mr. Chawla. Thank you, Mr. Habibullah.
Thank you, all friends, and thank you,
Thank you for the
Kavya.
book, sir. Thank you very much for the book.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this session. If you would like to know more about OLF 2020 or watch other videos, please visit newindianexpress.com and eventexpress.com. If you are more of a social media person, please visit our Facebook, Twitter and YouTube channels.